prison waiting room, clanging bars, guards looking on, and a Twinkie wedding cake. Yeah, you heard that right. A Twinkie wedding cake. That's just a taste of what we're dealing with today. The Menendez brothers, Lyle and Erik. Infamous doesn't even cover it. But we're not here to rehash the murders. We all know the story, or at least the headlines. Two rich kids from Beverly Hills accused of killing their own parents. Abuse allegations. A media frenzy. Crazy, right? But what fascinates me, what keeps me coming back to this case, is what happened asterisk after asterisk after the verdict, after the sentencing. Because, believe it or not, love, or something like it, found its way into the story.
It's definitely not your typical love story.
That's an understatement. We're talking about the women who married Lyle and Erik. Asterisk. After asterisk, they were convicted of murdering their parents.
That's a lot to unpack.
Let's start with Erik.
Yeah.
1999. He marries a woman named Tammi right there in prison.
Not exactly a fairy tale wedding.
No kidding.
And keep in mind, in California, conjugal visits. Not an option for someone convicted of violent crimes against family members. So we're talking about a marriage where physical intimacy is completely off the table.
Wow. So how does that even work? I mean, what kind of relationship is that?
Letters, phone calls, those become lifelines.
And that's what I find so compelling. I mean, think about it. Tammi reached out to Erik asterisk during asterisk his trial. She had lost her own husband to suicide and felt some kind of connection to Erik's story. But to go from offering condolences to marrying the guy.
It's definitely a head-scratcher.
It makes you wonder about her motivations, you know.
Well, there's actually a term for that, hybristophilia.
Hybrid what?
Hybristophilia. It describes an attraction to people who've committed crimes.
So you're saying some people are actually attracted to criminals?
Yeah.
Like it's a thing.
It's a real phenomenon. And it's more complex than it might seem at first glance. It's not about condoning the crime itself. Some researchers believe it has to do with notoriety, the allure of someone who's been at the center of a huge scandal, the power dynamics at play. Others point to a savior complex, this belief that they can change the person, redeem them somehow.
Wow. That's a lot to process. But just to be clear, we're not trying to diagnose anyone here.
Absolutely not. Every situation is unique.
Right. And in Tammy's case, she was adamant that Erik was a changed man, that her love, her support, gave him something to strive for within the walls of prison. And Erik himself has said that Tammi was a lifesaver, that she helped him to be a better person.
It's a powerful testament to the human need for connection, even in the most unlikely of circumstances.
No kidding. But still, let's not romanticize it. We're talking about a marriage where a 15-minute phone call is a big deal. That's their reality.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how we adapt, how we find connection, even when we're physically separated.
It's wild. But let's not forget, Erik's story, as unusual as it is just one half of this equation. His brother, Lyle, also found love after prison. Twice, actually.
It's true. Lyle's journey through marriage is, shall we say, a bit more complicated.
To put it mildly.
His first marriage was to a model, Anna Erickson. And get this, they got married on the day of his sentencing.
Wow. Talk about adding to an already emotionally charged day.
It really highlights the strange juxtaposition, doesn't it? Celebrating a union while facing a life sentence?
It's heavy stuff.
And remember, Erik was his best man.
Right. So surreal when you really think about it. Two brothers, both convicted of murdering their parents, standing up there at a prison wedding.
It's a stark reminder that family ties, for better or for worse, can run incredibly deep.
No doubt. But back to Lyle. That first marriage, it didn't exactly have a storybook ending.
No, it didn't. They divorced after 5 years.
And the rumor was that Lyle had been, well, let's just say, keeping in touch with other women.
It's not uncommon, unfortunately. The dynamics of prison relationships are incredibly complex.
I can only imagine.
For someone in Lyle's position, cut off from the outside world, letters can become a lifeline.
A connection to something beyond those prison walls.
Exactly. And for the people writing those letters, well, there's a certain allure to it.
The forbidden romance angle.
It's easy to judge from afar, but these situations are rarely black and white. We're talking about human beings with complex emotions trying to navigate incredibly difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. And then there's Lyle's second marriage, which, as we know, has actually stood the test of time, over 2 decades. He married Rebecca Sneed, a magazine editor turned lawyer, back in 2003. And what gets me is that Lyle has described their communication as being very free of distractions, more intimate even than many couples who are physically together. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? They're stuck in this situation, can't even be in the same room together, and somehow it leads to this deep connection.
It definitely challenges our assumptions about how intimacy works.
Totally. Makes you wonder if we could all learn a thing or two from it.
Perhaps. Maybe a little forced simplicity in our communication wouldn't hurt. And of course, their situation isn't exactly something to aspire to.
No, absolutely not. And speaking of complicated situations, there's that Netflix series we should talk about.
Ah, yes. Monsters. The Lyle and Erik Menendez story. It definitely brought the case back into the public eye.
To say the least. And not everyone was thrilled about it.
Right. The family released that statement.
Yeah. Tammi and like 24 members of the Menendez family called it out, said it was full of lies and just trying to exploit their story for views.
It brings up those essential questions about true crime, you know. Where's the line between telling a compelling story and exploiting real people's trauma?
It's a tough one. Because, yeah, we're all kind of sucked in by these stories, these glimpses into the darkest parts of humanity, but we got to be aware of the responsibility that comes with that.
Exactly. We can't forget that these are real lives, real families affected by these crimes.
It's a balancing act, for sure. And honestly, there's no easy answer. But it's something we should all be thinking about.
100%. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Two brothers convicted of a horrific crime, and yet they find love, or at least versions of it, within the confines of prison. What can we take away from all of this?
Right. What's the message in all of this?
I think it reminds us that humans are incredibly complex creatures. We're capable of great love, great cruelty, and everything in between. And sometimes those impulses intersect in ways that we can't even begin to understand.
It's messy.
Exactly. Life is messy. And the Menendez brothers, their story, it throws that messiness right back in our faces. It asks us to grapple with uncomfortable truths about love, justice, and what it means to be human.
And maybe, just maybe, it reminds us to look a little closer at our own lives, our own choices, and ask ourselves some tough questions.
Because at the end of the day, maybe we're not all that different from the people we read about in headlines, just trying to find our way through the darkness.
Sometimes with a Twinkie wedding cake in a prison waiting room.
Exactly.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We'll be back next week with another look at the strange and fascinating world of true crime.